Success rarely announces its danger with thunder. It whispers warmly, like sunlight on skin, convincing you that gravity has quietly stopped working. Come closer to the fire. Sit where the shadows stretch long across the stone floor, and the night listens without judgment. Tonight is not a story about failure. It is a story about ascent. About that precise, intoxicating moment when the air thins, the world below shrinks, and the mind begins to believe it has outgrown consequence. In the old myths, the gods did not punish hunger or ambition. They punished forgetfulness, forgetting that flesh has limits, forgetting that height always carries a cost. Icarus did not fall because he flew. He fell because, for a brief and fatal instant, he believed the sun was impressed by him. You have felt this moment before, even if you did not name it. The trade that keeps winning. The risk that no longer feels like risk. The applause that grows louder while the inner voice grows quieter. History is filled with men who mistook momentum for immortality, and markets are their modern altar. Fortunes are not usually destroyed by ignorance. They are destroyed by confidence that has lost its humility. This is not a warning whispered from fear. It is counsel spoken from experience, passed down through ash and ruin, through empires that touched the sky and dissolved into dust. Tonight, we will walk through those heights together. Slowly, carefully, we will study the art of flying without burning. If this fire warms you, if these stories steady your hands and sharpen your sight, consider liking this video, subscribing to the Echoes of Wealth channel, or supporting our work so these quiet lessons can continue to be told. There is a moment just before disaster when the world becomes unnaturally quiet, not the peaceful quiet of safety, but the silence of thin air. Sound does not travel well at altitude. Warnings soften. Screams fall inward. Even reason begins to echo instead of argue. This is the silence that surrounds men who believe they have finally figured it out. Picture it slowly. A young trader sits alone at night, screens glowing like small artificial suns. The numbers move in his favor again and again. The body learns faster than the mind. Dopamine floods before wisdom can speak. His breathing slows. His shoulders loosen. The ancient animal inside him whispers the most dangerous sentence a human can hear. I am different. Across centuries, the same sentence has been spoken in palaces, tents, libraries, and counting houses. Spoken by kings who had never lost a battle. By alchemists who believed they could command nature. By bankers who thought mathematics had replaced fate. By sons who flew higher than their fathers ever dared. History does not shout when this sentence is spoken. It waits. In Greek, there was a word for this condition. Hubris. Not pride. Not confidence. Something colder and more elegant. Hubris was the moment a mortal forgot his scale, forgot that the universe is not impressed by speed, intelligence, or ambition, only by balance. Icarus is remembered as a boy who fell. That is a misunderstanding. He is the patron saint of overperformance. He did exactly what the system rewarded. He climbed. He accelerated. He optimized. The sun did not chase him. It did not need to. Excess always finds its own heat. The most seductive lie ever told is that danger announces itself clearly. In reality, danger often feels like mastery, control, clarity, even peace. By the time fear returns, it is usually too late to act on it. Look closely at financial history, and you will notice a pattern that repeats with cruel precision. The collapse does not begin in chaos. It begins in order, in models that work, in strategies that outperform, in narratives that explain everything so well they leave no room for doubt. The crash is merely the consequence arriving late to a party that hubris started. This is why so many intelligent people lose everything. Not because they lacked knowledge, but because knowledge removed their caution. The mind becomes arrogant long before the balance sheet bleeds. And when gravity finally returns, it returns all at once. Tonight is not about fear. Fear is loud and clumsy. Tonight is about reverence, about remembering that every system has a breaking point. Every ascent has a temperature limit. Every wing, no matter how beautifully engineered, is still made of something that can melt. As this fire burns low and steady, we will revisit men who flew too high and men who refused to. We will walk through empires at their peak, markets at their most euphoric, and minds at the exact moment humility left the room. And slowly, deliberately, we will extract the one skill that separates survivors from legends. Not how to fly, but how to land. The Persians believed the world could be measured, catalogued, and conquered. By the time Xerxes inherited the throne, his empire already stretched farther than any civilization had dared to imagine. From the Indus Valley to the edges of Europe, the earth itself seemed to bend beneath Persian sandals. Gold flowed without resistance. Armies moved like weather systems. Messengers ran faster than rumor. To be Persian was to live inside inevitability. Xerxes did not grow up learning limits. He grew up watching them dissolve. His father, Darius the Great, had done what strong rulers do. He expanded, then paused. He measured what had been taken. He respected the invisible line between ambition and stability. Xerxes inherited not only an empire, but the expectation that expansion was not a choice, but a duty. When Greece defied Persia, it was not seen as resistance. It was seen as confusion. A small collection of quarrelsome city-states refusing to accept gravity. Xerxes prepared not for a war, but for a demonstration. The scale of his response was almost ceremonial. Ancient sources speak of armies so vast they drank rivers dry, of supply lines that moved like arteries across continents, of bridges built across the Hellespont, binding land and sea under the king's command. When storms destroyed the first bridges, Xerxes ordered the water whipped and branded, as if nature itself had committed treason. This detail matters, not because it is cruel, but because it reveals the moment hubris hardened into policy. A man who believes even the sea must obey has already flown too high. As the Persian host marched into Greece, fear preceded them. Cities burned. Athens was emptied and then desecrated. From a distance, Xerxes watched his forces advance and believed the story was already finished. The sun was warm. The wings were holding, but Greece was not Persia. It did not fight like an empire. It fought like stone, patient, narrow, unimpressed by size. At Thermopylae, a small force delayed the Persian tide not with strength, but with geography and discipline. At Salamis, the sea that Xerxes thought he had punished became his executioner. Massive Persian ships, symbols of imperial power, could not maneuver in tight waters. Greek vessels moved like blades, agile, focused, relentless. Xerxes watched the destruction from a throne built on the shore. The story did not make sense anymore. The numbers were wrong. The scale was wrong. For the first time, the sun felt hot. This is where history turns from spectacle into lesson. Xerxes did not lose because he lacked resources. He lost because his size removed his sensitivity. His system could not feel small errors early. By the time failure registered, it was already catastrophic. The empire survived, but the myth of invincibility was gone. And once an empire loses its myth, its decline has already begun. In finance, this is the moment when a portfolio grows so large it can no longer pivot. When leverage multiplies gains but erases agility. When success builds blind spots faster than defenses. Xerxes teaches us that scale is not power by default. Scale is responsibility. The larger you become, the more violently mistakes compound. The higher you fly, the less time you have to react when the wax begins to soften. Most people believe risk comes from not having enough. History shows us that the greatest risks come from having too much, too fast, with no memory of gravity. Xerxes returned home alive, but diminished. Greece remained unconquered, and the world learned a quiet lesson that markets would repeat thousands of years later. Invincibility is always temporary. Come closer to the fire. This part of the story must be told slowly, because speed would do it injustice. Xerxes was born into a world without ceilings. From his earliest memory, the earth did not resist his family. Lands folded. Peoples bent. Gold arrived as tribute, not reward. When you grow up watching maps expand every year of your childhood, you do not learn caution. You learn expectation. The Persians did not see themselves as conquerors in the crude sense. They believed they were organizers of chaos. Bring order where there is noise. Bring law where there is disorder. This belief is important because it allowed power to feel moral. And when power feels moral, it stops listening. Xerxes inherited more than a throne. He inherited momentum. His father, Darius, had built the empire patiently, like a man stacking stones with an understanding of weight. Darius knew when to press forward and when to pause. He had learned, through scars and setbacks, that expansion without digestion leads to collapse. But wisdom is fragile when it is not earned firsthand. When Darius died, the court whispered the same expectation in different languages. Continue. Expand. Complete what your father began. Greece was not just a territory. It was an unfinished sentence. To Xerxes, Greece represented disorder masquerading as independence. City-states arguing endlessly. No king. No central authority. To a man raised in imperial symmetry, this looked like an insult to structure itself. The decision to invade did not feel like ambition. It felt like correction. The scale of preparation was staggering, even by ancient standards. Years were spent gathering men from every corner of the empire. Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Phoenicians, each with their own weapons, their own gods, their own reasons for marching. Supply depots were built across continents, roads carved, rivers redirected. This was not an army. It was a moving civilization. And then there is the bridge, the Hellespont, a narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, became the final obstacle between idea and execution. Xerxes ordered bridges built from boats lashed together, binding land to land. When a storm rose and destroyed them, something inside him shifted. Ancient historians tell us he ordered the sea whipped, 300 lashes, chains thrown into the water, a declaration of dominance over nature itself. Whether exaggerated or not, the symbolism is unmistakable. The king was no longer negotiating with reality. He was commanding it. This is the precise moment hubris enters the story. Not arrogance in speech, but arrogance in worldview. The belief that scale alone grants exemption from limits. As the army marched, the world trembled. Villages emptied before the dust of Persian feet arrived. Some surrendered without resistance, offering earth and water, the symbols of submission. Others fled to mountains or islands, choosing uncertainty over obedience. Athens chose evacuation. The city was abandoned, left to fire and ash. From a hill overlooking the ruins, Xerxes watched the Acropolis burn. The smoke rose into the same sky that carried his banners. In that moment, nothing suggested defeat. The wings were intact. The sun felt distant. But power distorts perspective. When you command an army so large it takes days for its rear to hear what its front has already done, you lose feedback. You lose sensitivity. Small failures disappear inside magnitude. The Greeks understood something the Persians did not. They did not try to match size. They did not seek glory in numbers. They sought constraint, narrow passes, tight waters, places where excess became weakness. Thermopylae was not a victory for Greece in the traditional sense. It was a delay, a message written in blood, a reminder that discipline can stall force, and that courage, when placed correctly, can alter the rhythm of history. Xerxes won the pass, but he paid for it with time and certainty. Time matters more than armies. While Persia advanced, Greece prepared, not as an empire, but as a network, independent, stubborn, adaptive. And when the decisive moment came, it came not on land, but at sea. Salamis was a trap made of water and patience. The Persian fleet, vast and confident, followed Greek ships into narrow straits where size became liability. Oars tangled. Commands echoed too late. The Greeks struck with precision, not fury. Xerxes watched from his throne by the shore. He had positioned himself there to witness victory. Instead, he witnessed unraveling. Ships collided. Signals failed. The sea turned against him, not because it was angry, but because it was indifferent. This is the lesson most people miss. Nature does not punish arrogance. It simply stops accommodating it. As Persian ships burned and sank, something irreversible happened. The myth cracked. The idea that size guaranteed outcome collapsed in real time. The army remained enormous. The resources remained vast. But belief had been wounded, and belief is the invisible architecture of power. In finance, this is the moment when a strategy that has never failed suddenly encounters a condition it was never designed for. The model still looks perfect. The assumptions still appear rational. But the environment has changed, and scale has removed flexibility. Xerxes did not lose everything that day, but he lost the illusion that expansion was destiny. He returned home alive, crowned, wealthy, yet diminished in a way no ledger records. The fall does not always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like survival without supremacy. And that, too, is a kind of descent. After Salamis, the world did not end for Xerxes. And that is precisely why the lesson is dangerous. He still had an army large enough to darken valleys. He still ruled an empire whose treasury could refill itself with a signature. He still wore the crown of kings. From the outside, nothing looked broken. From the inside, something essential had shifted. Power, once questioned, never fully recovers its innocence. Xerxes retreated to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius to finish what remained of the campaign. This was not cowardice. It was calculation. Or at least, it felt like calculation. The kind that arrives late, after momentum has already been squandered. A quiet recognition that the sun is closer than expected. Mardonius would eventually be defeated at Plataea. The land victory Persia believed was inevitable collapsed under Greek discipline and terrain. Together, Salamis and Plataea ended the Persian dream of European dominance. The empire endured, but its expansion stopped breathing outward and began folding inward. Here is the detail most histories rush past. Xerxes did not become wiser after this. He became more insulated. Back in Persia, he turned his attention to monumental projects. Palaces at Persepolis grew larger, more ornate, more symbolic. Columns rose like frozen declarations of permanence. Gold-covered reliefs depicting subjects kneeling in eternal submission. Architecture replaced conquest as the theater of power. This is what often happens after a failed ascent. When outward expansion proves dangerous, the ego retreats inward and builds monuments to itself. Court life became denser. Intrigue replaced battle. Whispers replaced marching orders. Xerxes, once the commander of rivers and seas, found himself navigating something far more treacherous: proximity to flatterers. Assassination did not come from foreign enemies. It came from inside his own walls. This, too, matters. When a system grows too large and too confident, threats rarely arrive from where vigilance is focused. The Persians prepared endlessly for external resistance. They did not prepare for internal decay. In the markets, this is the phase after a major drawdown that did not kill you. The portfolio survives. The capital remains. but something subtle changes. Risk is no longer examined honestly. Instead, it is buried under complexity, distraction, or overconfidence in recovery. Xerxes began trusting symbols over signals. He trusted the image of power more than its function. He trusted loyalty as performance rather than loyalty as truth. And in doing so, he repeated the original sin of hubris, but in quieter form. Eventually, Xerxes was murdered in his own palace by those closest to him. Not on a battlefield, not under foreign banners, but in the corridors of comfort and routine. His reign ended not with spectacle, but with suffocation. This is how flying too high often concludes. Not with dramatic collapse, but with a slow erosion of relevance, awareness, and protection. Now come closer, because this is where the story crosses fully into finance. The great danger is not taking risk. The great danger is surviving risk without learning from it. Many investors experience a version of Salamis, a sharp loss, a humbling event, a reminder that markets are not impressed by confidence. And yet, if survival follows, the lesson is often misinterpreted. The mind says, "I was right in the end. I lived. The capital recovered. The system worked." But what actually happened was tolerance. Reality allowed you to remain intact long enough to decide whether you would adapt. Xerxes did not. In markets, scale magnifies this failure. A small trader feels mistakes immediately. Pain arrives fast. Correction is forced. But as capital grows, feedback slows. Losses hide inside percentages. Errors become abstract. You stop feeling gravity until the fall is terminal. This is why the most catastrophic financial collapses occur at the peak of sophistication. When intelligence is highest. When models are most elegant. When leverage feels justified by history. Xerxes believed history was on his side. He forgot that history only moves forward. It does not protect incumbents. The Greeks won not because they were purer or braver, but because they respected constraints. They fought where they could feel reality pressing back. Narrow passes, tight seas, limited scope. These environments preserved feedback. In investing, this is position sizing, risk limits, voluntary ceilings, structures that force humility before markets enforce it violently. The lesson of Xerxes is not do not expand. It is expand with sensitivity. Ask yourself, as you listen to this fire crackle and settle, where feedback has disappeared from your decisions, where size has replaced awareness, where comfort has numbed caution. Because the sun does not burn wings immediately. It warms them first, and warmth feels like success. Let us linger for a moment on the sensation of warmth, because that is where most stories of ruin truly begin. Xerxes did not wake one morning and decide to defy the gods. He woke into a world that had never contradicted him loudly enough to matter. Every year of uninterrupted success thickens the illusion that the future will behave like the past. This is not arrogance as personality. This is arrogance as pattern recognition gone wrong. In Persia, messengers ran on roads designed to erase distance. Orders traveled faster than doubt. Gold smoothed resistance before it could harden. The empire functioned so efficiently that it disguised its own fragility. When systems work too well, they stop teaching. The Greeks, by contrast, lived inside friction. Their city-states argued constantly. Power was contested. Authority was unstable. But this instability trained them to adapt. They learned how to fight smaller, smarter, and closer to the edge of failure. Their political chaos was their risk management. Xerxes never experienced that kind of constraint. He inherited solutions, not questions. This distinction is crucial in finance. Those who inherit capital often inherit the illusion that capital is self-sustaining. Those who build it through uncertainty develop instincts that spreadsheets cannot encode. The difference is not intelligence. It is exposure. Consider the Persian Navy at Salamis again. On open water, it was unmatched. On open water, scale dominates. But the Greeks chose terrain where advantage inverted. The narrow straits turned Persian mass into confusion. Oars struck each other. Commands conflicted. Ships designed for dominance became liabilities. This is exactly how leverage behaves in changing environments. Leverage is not inherently evil. Like scale, it amplifies whatever environment it is placed in. In stable conditions, it looks like genius. In constrained conditions, it becomes a weapon against its owner. Xerxes believed his fleet could operate anywhere because it had always succeeded somewhere. That assumption cost him the war. In markets, this is the trader who believes a strategy that worked in liquidity will work in stress, who assumes that exits will be available when everyone needs them, who forgets that correlation rises precisely when it is most inconvenient. The Greeks did not outspend Persia. They outweighted it. They understood something deeply unfashionable in human psychology. Time favors those who can endure. Endurance requires humility. It requires building systems that expect failure, not perfection. Xerxes built an empire that assumed obedience. The Greeks built a resistance that assumed loss and planned anyway. When you assume obedience, every act of defiance feels like betrayal. When you assume loss, resistance becomes information. This is why large portfolios often underperform over time. Not because capital is cursed, but because size discourages listening. Small movements are ignored. Minor losses dismissed. Early warnings silenced by past success. Xerxes did not see Salamis as a structural message. He saw it as an anomaly, a temporary embarrassment, something to be corrected by more force, more resources, more assertion. But markets, like seas, do not respond to assertion. They respond to pressure and release. The Greeks released pressure. They retreated, regrouped, lured. Persia applied pressure until pressure had nowhere to go but inward. This pattern repeats endlessly. In banking collapses, in hedge fund blow-ups, in personal financial ruin. The story always sounds the same in hindsight. No one saw it coming. Everything was working. The assumptions were sound. They always are. until they are not. What Xerxes lacked was not intelligence or resources. He lacked a break. Breaks are not signs of weakness. They are signs of respect for momentum. The most dangerous phase of any system is not growth. It is uncontrolled continuation. When the system no longer asks why it is moving, only how fast. Xerxes crossed the Hellespont not because he needed to, but because he could. That is the subtle difference that defines hubris. In investing, this is the moment you increase position size, not because the risk-reward improved, but because confidence did. Because the last trades worked. Because the account balance allows it. This is flying closer to the sun without adjusting materials. There is a reason ancient myths encode warnings in stories rather than rules. Rules invite debate. Stories bypass the intellect and settle into instinct. The story of Xerxes is not about defeat. It is about miscalibration, about treating scale as armor instead of exposure. As the Persians withdrew, Greek confidence grew. But the Greeks would eventually face their own hubris in later centuries. No civilization escapes this cycle permanently. The point is not to avoid the sun. The point is to know when warmth becomes danger. If you listen carefully, every market tells you when conditions are changing. Liquidity thins. Volatility shifts. Correlations creep. But these signals are subtle, and they require humility to hear. Xerxes could not hear them anymore. His empire was too loud. Ask yourself, quietly, without judgment, where noise has replaced signal in your own decisions, where success has muted curiosity, where scale has replaced sensitivity, because the fall rarely begins with fear. It begins with comfort. Comfort is a dangerous companion. It convinces you that vigilance is unnecessary, that the hard part is behind you, that the forces which lifted you will continue to do so indefinitely. Xerxes lived surrounded by this comfort. Silk curtains, endless servants, councils designed to agree before he spoke. When reality no longer argues with you, imagination begins to rule. After the Greek campaign, the Persian court shifted in tone. Fewer counsels about expansion, more about preservation. Yet preservation was misunderstood as fortification, not adaptation. Palaces were reinforced. Ceremonies multiplied. The empire looked stronger than ever from a distance. Up close, it was stiffening. Stiff systems break suddenly. The Greeks, meanwhile, returned to their quarrels. Victors rarely enjoy unity for long. But in their fragmentation, they retained a quality Persia was losing: responsiveness. Each city-state could fail without collapsing the whole. Losses were localized. Mistakes were survivable. This is the principle of optionality, long before the word existed. Xerxes ruled a monolith. When it moved, everything moved. When it failed, the consequences rippled everywhere. The Greeks ruled a mosaic. Pieces could crack without shattering the image. In finance, optionality is not about predicting the future. It is about surviving many futures. Xerxes could not imagine a future where Persia was not dominant. That imagination gap was his greatest vulnerability. He had no emotional preparation for decline, only for interruption. This is why most investors are psychologically unprepared for drawdowns. They imagine gains as normal and losses as anomalies. Reality operates in the opposite direction. Loss is frequent. Gain is conditional. The Persian treasury remained vast, but resources are not resilience. Resilience comes from structure, not scale. When incentives reward obedience over truth, systems drift toward fantasy. In the court of Xerxes, bad news softened as it traveled upward. No one wanted to be the messenger of discomfort. So warnings arrived late, diluted, or not at all. The king lived in a world optimized for his emotional stability, not for survival. Markets do not care about your emotional stability. They respond to pressure, to imbalance, to excess. They punish systems that suppress negative feedback because suppressed feedback accumulates force. The lesson here is not political. It is structural. If your financial system, your strategy, or your mindset is designed to protect your ego rather than expose your errors, it is already failing. Xerxes did not adjust risk after Greece. He adjusted narrative. The story became about legacy, not learning, about glory preserved, not assumptions questioned. This is the moment when wisdom could have entered. It did not. Eventually, assassination ended his reign. But long before the blade, there was irrelevance. Persia ceased to be the future. It became the past still breathing. This is the silent death most investors experience. They remain active, wealthy even, but disconnected from opportunity. The market moves on. They defend old positions with new justifications. Capital stagnates. Curiosity dries up. The sun is no longer a threat because flight has stopped. But the damage is done. The Greeks told the story of hubris not to shame ambition, but to civilize it. To remind leaders and citizens alike that success carries responsibility, not just to expand, but to remain adaptable. Risk management is not a technical discipline. It is a moral one. It requires accepting that the universe does not owe you continuity. Xerxes believed continuity was inherited. The Greeks believed it was earned repeatedly. This difference explains everything. As you listen to this, notice how your body responds to the idea of limits. Resistance, relief. Limits feel like cages to those intoxicated by ascent. To those who have seen collapse, limits feel like shelter. The most powerful investors are not those who predict tops. They are those who build exits into their plans long before emotion clouds judgment. Xerxes had no exit from his assumptions, only from his campaign, and campaigns can always be abandoned. Beliefs are harder to leave. The warning of Icarus lives here, not in the fall, but in the refusal to recalibrate mid-flight. Because the sun does not chase kings. Kings drift toward it. Now let us gather the threads gently. The way one folds a battle map after the war is already decided. Xerxes did not fail because he aimed high. He failed because he mistook height for immunity. The empire he ruled was real, vast, and formidable. But reality does not grant exemptions. It only delays consequences when conditions allow. The Greeks understood something that does not appear in their statues, but lives between the lines of their tragedies. Power must be shaped by limits, or it will be shaped by catastrophe. Their myths were not entertainment. They were training. When they spoke of hubris, they were not condemning ambition. They were warning against amnesia, forgetting scale, forgetting feedback, forgetting that the world pushes back harder the further you lean into it. Xerxes leaned on the world with everything he had. In finance, this leaning shows up as concentration disguised as conviction, as leverage justified by track records, as narratives that explain away volatility instead of respecting it. Each step feels logical. Each step is defended by recent success, and each step quietly increases fragility. What makes this so difficult is that success teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches that outcomes validate behavior, that because you survived, you were correct. Xerxes survived Greece. His empire survived him. And yet, the future slipped away. The most dangerous phrase in investing is not "this time is different." It is "I was right." Because being right once does not prove robustness. It only proves alignment with a particular moment in time. Markets move. Conditions shift. Structures decay. What remains safe is not brilliance, but humility encoded into process. The Greeks did not defeat Persia because they were destined to win. They won because they respected terrain. In investing, terrain is liquidity, volatility, correlation, time horizon, psychological tolerance. You do not fight the market where it is strongest. You choose environments where your weaknesses matter less. Xerxes fought the sea on the sea's terms. He fought geography as if it were politics. And the sea answered the way it always does. Without malice, without memory. This is why take profit is not a lack of faith. It is an acknowledgement of physics. You exit not because you fear loss, but because you respect momentum. You reduce leverage not because you doubt yourself, but because you understand how quickly conditions reverse. You cap position size not because you lack courage, but because you intend to survive. Survival is the prerequisite for compounding. Xerxes could not compound power because he could not step back. His identity was fused with expansion. To stop advancing felt like dying. And so he advanced until advancement itself became fatal to relevance. Many investors do the same. They scale strategies until strategies collapse under their own weight. They chase returns until returns disappear. They confuse motion with progress. The lesson of this chapter is not modesty. It is calibration. To fly is human. To adjust altitude is wisdom. As the fire settles into embers, remember this image. A king standing on the shore, watching his fleet burn, still believing he commands the sun. Not because he is foolish, but because he has never needed to doubt. Doubt, when used correctly, is not weakness. It is instrumentation. The Greeks built myths to teach this to children. Markets teach it to adults, with higher tuition. If you wish to fly long, you must learn to fly lower than your confidence demands. You must design systems that listen when the world whispers, not only when it shouts. Icarus did not need stronger wings. He needed a limit he was willing to obey. There are men who fear ignorance, and there are men who fear limits. Faust feared limits more than he feared damnation. Long before he became a symbol, Faust was imagined as a real man of the late medieval world. A scholar moving through candlelit rooms thick with smoke and parchment. A man who had read everything his age could offer and found it insufficient. Theology, medicine, law, astronomy. Each discipline promised truth. Each one, after years of devotion, revealed only another door. This is the detail that matters. Faust was not lazy. He was not reckless. He was exhausted by mastery without transcendence. In the Germany of whispered prayers and plague memories, knowledge was sacred but incomplete. Universities taught doctrine. Churches taught obedience. Nature remained stubbornly opaque. To Faust, this was an insult. If the universe had rules, he wanted them written clearly. If God had designed reality, Faust wanted the schematics. So he turned inward and then downward. Alchemy was not merely about gold. That is the lie told by those who never studied it. True alchemy was about control. The transformation of base matter into perfected form, lead into gold, chaos into order, mortality into permanence. To master alchemy was to stand halfway between man and God. Faust believed he was close. The legends say he summoned Mephistopheles not in desperation, but in confidence. Not crying, but negotiating. This distinction is essential. Faust did not beg for power. He believed power was owed to him for his intelligence. The pact he made was precise. No vague promises. No drunken wish. Knowledge without limit. Experience without consequence. Pleasure without decay. For a time. This is where the myth sharpens into warning. Faust did not underestimate the cost. He dismissed it. He believed that future consequences were negotiable once present mastery was achieved. He believed that when the time came, his brilliance would find an escape clause. This belief has destroyed more fortunes than greed ever has. Faust's early successes were intoxicating. He dazzled courts, manipulated nature, bent people and events with effortless grace. The world finally behaved the way he always believed it should. Every victory confirmed the same idea. I was right to reject restraint. Notice how closely this mirrors the early phase of financial success driven by complexity. Derivatives that unlock hidden value. Leverage that multiplies efficiency. Strategies that seem to extract profit from thin air. At first, everything works. Not because the system is safe, but because conditions are forgiving. Faust interpreted forgiveness as validation. The philosophers of his time warned that knowledge divorced from humility curdles. Faust laughed at them. What use is humility, he thought, when truth is finally within reach? This is the moment hubris transforms from arrogance into worldview. Faust no longer saw limits as signals. He saw them as flaws in design. The universe was not warning him. It was challenging him. And challenges exist to be overcome. In financial terms, this is the moment when risk ceases to be priced and begins to be ignored. When volatility is framed as inefficiency rather than information. When drawdowns are seen as insults to intelligence. Faust did not collapse immediately. That is why the story is dangerous. He thrived. He expanded. He lived larger than ordinary men. The cost was deferred, not erased. Deferred costs always grow interest. As Faust's power increased, his sensitivity decreased. He no longer noticed small disturbances. Relationships flattened into utility. Experiences lost texture. When everything is possible, nothing feels meaningful for long. This is another hidden truth of excess return. It dulls perception. Markets reward this dullness temporarily. They lull participants into believing mastery has replaced uncertainty. Faust felt this deeply. He mistook numbness for transcendence. But alchemy has a rule older than scripture. Transformation without balance produces poison. Faust's pact did not fail because Mephistopheles tricked him. It succeeded exactly as written. That is the horror. Faust received what he demanded, and in doing so, revealed that his demand itself was the flaw. In the final accounting, the soul is not lost suddenly. It is eroded slowly, as shortcuts replace process and outcomes replace meaning. This is the stage where finance enters fully. Faust's tragedy mirrors the investor who seeks returns detached from underlying reality. Profit without exposure. Yield without risk. Control without friction. These structures work until they don't, and when they fail completely. The lesson is not that ambition invites punishment. It is that ambition without containment invites blindness. Faust believed intelligence granted exemption from limits. Markets teach the opposite. Intelligence without humility accelerates ruin. As the fire crackles lower, consider where you may be bargaining with the future, where you are trading resilience for speed, where you assume that if consequences arrive, you will be clever enough to outmaneuver them. Faust believed that too. Faust's life did not collapse the moment the pact was sealed. That is the lie people tell to comfort themselves. Real ruin is patient. It allows you time to enjoy your mistake. With Mephistopheles at his side, Faust moved through the world as if gravity had loosened its grip. Doors opened before he knocked. Crowds leaned toward him. Knowledge arrived fully formed, without the long, humbling labor of uncertainty. The pain of not knowing disappeared, and with it, the discipline that knowing normally demands. This is the first hidden cost of limitless access. It removes apprenticeship. Faust no longer needed to struggle. And without struggle, judgment atrophies. In the legends, Faust's desires begin modestly. Youth, sensation, recognition. These are not monstrous cravings. They are human. That is what makes the story effective. Evil rarely enters as horror. it enters as convenience. Mephistopheles does not force Faust to act. He reframes the world. He offers interpretations that make indulgence feel justified. The devil does not drag men into hell. He convinces them they are already above it. Faust begins to treat people as instruments. Gretchen is not loved. She is experienced. Her tragedy is not caused by cruelty alone, but by indifference. Faust does not hate her. He simply does not consider her fully real anymore. This is what excess control does to perception. When outcomes are guaranteed, empathy erodes. Consequences feel theoretical. In finance, this manifests as moral distance from risk. Losses are numbers. Counterparties are abstractions. Systemic impact becomes someone else's problem. The trader who never touches the underlying asset begins to forget that real lives absorb volatility. Faust's world grows increasingly hollow, even as it becomes more impressive. He can summon illusion, wealth, pleasure, but cannot summon meaning. The very thing he sought, fulfillment through mastery, recedes the closer he comes. This is not divine punishment. It is structural. When reward is detached from process, satisfaction collapses. The nervous system adapts. Each success requires amplification to feel real. This is the same mechanism that drives increasing leverage in search of the same emotional return. Faust escalates. New experiences. New conquests. Each one less nourishing than the last. He begins chasing intensity, not truth. The pact has inverted his compass. In some versions of the legend, Faust attempts creation itself, artificial life, homunculi, life without lineage or limit. This detail is often skipped, but it matters deeply. Creation without constraint is not creation. It is simulation. Modern finance is filled with homunculi, synthetic products that resemble value but lack substance. They perform beautifully under controlled conditions and disintegrate under stress. Faust cannot see this because he no longer feels stress. Mephistopheles absorbs it for him. That is the seduction. Risk does not disappear. It is merely transferred forward in time and outward in scope. Eventually, the bill arrives, not as fire, not as thunder, but as recognition. Faust realizes that he has become dependent on the very force he believed he controlled, that every act of mastery has narrowed his freedom rather than expanded it. He is powerful, but trapped. This is the moment every over-leveraged system reaches. The realization that options have collapsed, that what looked like flexibility was actually fragility in disguise. The soul, in this context, is not a religious concept. It is optionality, the ability to choose differently when conditions change. Faust traded optionality for certainty. Markets punish that trade relentlessly. When the final hour approaches, Faust does not rage. He calculates. He searches for loopholes. He tries to outthink the contract. But contracts written against reality have no loopholes. The pact is enforced not by Mephistopheles, but by structure. Faust demanded infinite upside without enduring downside. The structure granted it temporarily, then reclaimed everything. This is why so many financial disasters feel sudden, but were years in the making. The reckoning compresses time. Deferred pain arrives all at once. Faust's final tragedy is not loss. It is clarity arriving too late. As you sit with this, notice how often modern finance celebrates the Faustian bargain. Speed over resilience, complexity over transparency, yield over durability. The myth persists because the temptation persists. The question is not whether Faust was evil. The question is whether he forgot to ask what kind of man he would become if everything worked. That question is the first step back from the sun. Faust's end is often misunderstood because people focus on the spectacle instead of the structure. Some tellings grant him redemption, others condemn him. But the moral does not hinge on theology. It hinges on timing. Insight that arrives after irreversible commitment is not wisdom. It is post-mortem. When Faust finally pauses, truly pauses, it is not because he fears punishment. It is because he recognizes the absence of something essential. The moments that once thrilled him now feel rehearsed. Power no longer surprises. Knowledge no longer humbles. The world has flattened into predictability. This is the terminal phase of excess control. In finance, this is when returns become mechanical. Profits still appear, but they no longer teach. Losses, when they occur, feel incomprehensible rather than informative. The system has lost its dialogue with reality. Faust's greatest tragedy is not that he sought too much, but that he sought it without patience. He bypassed the slow friction that shapes judgment. He replaced apprenticeship with access, and access without discipline produces fragility disguised as strength. Alchemy was never meant to erase limits. It was meant to reveal them. The original alchemists spoke of balance, of correspondence, of cycles. Lead became gold only through precise stages, each requiring time, failure, and adjustment. Faust skipped these stages. He demanded the result without the ritual. Markets are alchemical systems. Capital transforms through exposure, risk, and time. Skip any one of these, and the transformation becomes unstable. Faust's pact was not immoral because it involved a devil. It was immoral because it assumed exemption from reciprocity. Every system demands exchange. Energy for energy. Risk for reward. Time for growth. The moment you believe you have found a trade that breaks this law, you are already inside the myth. Faust's soul, in the end, represents something very specific: the capacity to learn from pain, to be shaped by consequence, to remain in conversation with the world. That capacity was the real collateral. When he lost it, everything else became hollow. This is why the most resilient investors are often those who have been hurt early, in manageable ways. Small losses teach respect. Early drawdowns inoculate against arrogance. They prevent Faustian thinking from taking root. The market, like the myth, is not cruel. It is reciprocal. If you take without listening, it takes back without asking. Faust's story survives because it is not about magic. It is about impatience, about mistaking acceleration for evolution, about believing intelligence can replace humility. As the fire dims and settles into coals, let this image stay with you. A man who touched everything he wanted and discovered that wanting had outpaced becoming. The lesson is quiet but unforgiving. Do not ask how much you can extract from a system. Ask how long you can remain inside it without losing yourself. Because the true cost of flying too close to the sun is not the fall. It is forgetting how to walk on the ground. It began, as these things always do, with beauty. Not the loud beauty of conquest or machinery, but something quieter and more intimate. A flower, delicate petals streaked with fire and ivory, blooming briefly in the damp soil of the Dutch Republic. Tulips arrived in Europe as curiosities, gifts from the Ottoman world, admired first by botanists, then by collectors, and finally by everyone who wished to appear discerning. At first, no one spoke of profit. The Dutch Golden Age was already rich. Ships returned daily from distant oceans heavy with spices, silks, and silver. Canals shimmered with commerce. Painters captured merchants with the same reverence once reserved for saints. Wealth was no longer shameful. It was cultural. In such an environment, taste becomes a form of power. Tulips were difficult, fragile, unpredictable. Some bloomed plain. Others burst into flames of color caused not by genetics, but by a virus that weakened the bulb while making it breathtaking. This detail matters. The most valuable tulips were already diseased. Collectors prized rarity above all else. A Semper Augustus, with its white petals laced by crimson veins, became an object of obsession. Owning one signaled not only wealth, but access, knowledge, standing. This is how markets begin, not with greed, but with identity. The Dutch did not initially buy tulips to sell them. They bought them to belong, to signal refinement in a society where money was abundant and status fluid. But markets are alchemical. Meaning transforms into price, and price invites speculation. Soon, bulbs were no longer planted. They were traded. Winter contracts emerged, promises to deliver bulbs months later when the ground thawed. These contracts changed hands in taverns, signed in chalk, sealed with handshakes and wine. No one thought this dangerous. It felt communal, familiar, harmless. A baker could trade a contract and make more in a week than he could in a year of labor. A sailor could retire on paper before the next voyage. The flowers themselves rarely changed hands. Only the promises did. This is the moment when reality began to loosen. Tulips became abstract. Numbers replaced soil. Value detached from use and anchored itself to expectation. Prices rose because they had risen yesterday. Each increase felt like confirmation rather than warning. The sun was warm. Stories spread faster than facts. A single bulb selling for the price of a canal house. a farmer exchanging land for a flower that would never be planted. These stories were often exaggerated, but exaggeration itself fueled belief. If others were becoming wealthy, why not you? This is not stupidity. It is social gravity. Humans do not evaluate value in isolation. We borrow conviction from the crowd. When enough people agree on a narrative, dissent feels irrational, even dangerous. In taverns, contracts changed hands multiple times a night. Each trade removed the tulip further from the earth and closer to myth. People spoke of prices, not plants, of futures, not seasons. The virus that created the most beautiful tulips also made them fragile. Yields were inconsistent. Bulbs failed unpredictably. But these details were inconvenient, and so they were ignored. In every bubble, there is something fragile made invisible by enthusiasm. The Dutch had laws governing trade, but tulip contracts lived in a gray zone. They were not fully enforceable. They relied on trust and honor. This, too, felt safe. After all, the community was prosperous, civilized, rational. Prosperity breeds the illusion that rules are unnecessary. As prices climbed, participation widened. What began among elites spread to artisans, laborers, and servants. Not because they were foolish, but because exclusion had become painful. To abstain felt like rejecting the future. This is the psychological core of speculation. The fear is not loss. It is being left behind. Tulip Mania did not explode. It thinned. One winter morning in 1637, an auction failed to attract buyers at expected prices. No panic, just hesitation. A pause. The kind that feels insignificant in the moment. But pauses in leveraged systems are lethal. Confidence faltered. Buyers waited. Sellers lowered prices slightly, then more. Contracts that had felt liquid suddenly felt heavy. Promises became obligations. The crowd, once eager, became cautious all at once. This is how gravity returns. No single villain caused the collapse. No external shock. No invasion. Just a collective realization that belief alone could not support the weight anymore. Prices fell faster than they had risen. Contracts were abandoned. Lawsuits followed. Fortunes evaporated, not because the flowers disappeared, but because the story did. Tulips bloomed again that spring, indifferent to the human drama. Beautiful, worth planting, worth enjoying, but no longer capable of carrying dreams of effortless wealth. In finance, this is the moment when narrative breaks. When price can no longer justify itself with yesterday's chart. When liquidity vanishes not from fear, but from disbelief. The lesson of Tulip Mania is often mocked, simplified into a parable of foolishness. That misses the point. The Dutch were sophisticated, educated, and prosperous. Their mistake was not ignorance. It was forgetting that beauty, when abstracted into expectation, becomes unstable. As the fire crackles softly, sit with this. Ask yourself where value in your world has drifted too far from substance, where promises trade more actively than reality, where warmth feels pleasant but dangerous, because every tulip that touches the sun believes it is different until winter ends. When the market turned, it did not announce itself with screaming bells or burning ships. It exhaled. The taverns were quieter. The chalkboards still stood, but fewer hands reached for them. Men who had spoken loudly weeks before now listened carefully, nodding without committing. This is how belief retreats. Not in panic, but in hesitation. The Dutch authorities attempted calm. They proposed settlements. Contracts, they argued, were not debts but intentions. Buyers could walk away for a small fee. This legal ambiguity softened the immediate violence of collapse, but it did not restore trust. Trust, once fractured, does not return by decree. What followed was not universal ruin, as later exaggerations suggest. Many losses were contained, but the psychological damage was profound. A society that had believed itself rational confronted the realization that it, too, could be carried away by narrative. This is the deeper wound bubbles leave behind. Not bankruptcy, but shame. People stopped speaking openly about their losses. Families absorbed them quietly. Pain became private, and in that privacy, a new rule took root. Never admit how much belief you once borrowed from the crowd. This silence is important. It is how the next bubble begins. Tulip Mania is often framed as absurd because it involved flowers. But the object is irrelevant. The structure is eternal. Abstraction, leverage, social proof, deferred settlement, fragile liquidity. In modern markets, the flowers change. Technology stocks, housing, cryptographic promises, exotic derivatives. Each era believes its object is different. Each era repeats the same architecture. What made tulips dangerous was not rarity, but detachment. The further the trade moved from soil and seasons, the more it relied on belief alone. When belief wavered, nothing remained to absorb the shock. This is the core principle of financial fragility. Systems built on expectation require constant reinforcement. Systems built on use can endure neglect. A house can stand empty. A factory can pause production. A productive asset has inertia. A purely speculative one collapses the moment attention shifts. During Tulip Mania, people stopped asking what a bulb was for. They only asked what it could become worth tomorrow. This is the precise moment utility dies and speculation is born. The most dangerous trades are those that cannot answer a simple question. Who uses this if I am wrong? When no one can answer, price floats freely, untethered, rising until gravity remembers it exists. Another overlooked detail of Tulip Mania is how quickly normalcy returned. Within years, the Dutch economy recovered. Trade resumed. Innovation continued. The bubble did not end civilization. It simply exposed a fault line. This is why bubbles are so seductive. They rarely destroy everything. They destroy selectively. They remove those who overextended, those who believed belief itself was sufficient collateral. In finance, this creates survivor bias. People point to recovery and conclude the risk was exaggerated. They forget who was erased. Tulip Mania teaches that markets are not moral judges. They do not punish greed. They punish fragility. If your position requires constant optimism to remain viable, it is already unstable. If it collapses the moment sentiment shifts, it was never robust. The Dutch learned this quietly. They did not ban speculation. They did not outlaw ambition. They internalized restraint. And restraint, unlike fear, compounds. As you listen to this, notice where your confidence relies on shared belief rather than underlying endurance, where you assume liquidity will always be there because it always has been, where warmth feels pleasant enough to ignore the season. The tulip did not deceive anyone. It bloomed as it always had. Humans deceived themselves by asking it to carry weight it was never meant to bear. That is the danger of touching the sun. You forget what things are for. After the silence settled, something subtle but enduring remained. The Dutch did not become cynical. They became measured. Trade continued. Ships sailed. Art flourished. But the collective imagination grew quieter. Speculation never vanished, yet it carried a faint echo of caution, like a scar that tightens when the weather changes. This is the final phase of every bubble. Not collapse, but memory. Tulip Mania did not teach the Dutch that markets are evil. It taught them that beauty can be misused, and that belief, when stretched too far, snaps without warning. The flowers returned to gardens where they belonged. Their value became aesthetic again, not existential. This is the natural resting place of assets. Use, enjoyment, purpose. In finance, the most resilient investments are those that can survive indifference. Assets that do not require applause to function. Businesses that produce value quietly, even when no one is watching. Tulips required attention. Contracts required constant belief. When attention faded, value evaporated. This is not a flaw of flowers. It is a flaw of abstraction. The virus that created the most prized tulips weakened the bulbs. This detail, often treated as botanical trivia, is metaphorical perfection. The most beautiful assets were the least robust. Their very allure came from instability. Markets are filled with similar seductions. High-yield instruments that promise elegance while hiding fragility. Strategies that shine precisely because they are stressed beyond safety. The disciplined investor learns to ask different questions. Not how much can this grow, but how does it survive neglect? Not how fast can it rise, but how gently does it fall? Tulip Mania teaches that take profit is not betrayal. It is acknowledgement, a recognition that narratives have lifespans, and that exiting while belief still exists is not cowardice. It is clarity. Many who lost money did not lose it because prices fell. They lost it because they waited for belief to return. Belief rarely returns on command. This is the cruelty of bubbles. They train participants to confuse patience with denial, to interpret caution as weakness, to hold on not because value remains, but because identity has attached itself to the position. The Dutch learned, painfully, that markets do not reward loyalty. They reward alignment with reality. Reality is slow. It is seasonal. It blooms and recedes without explanation. As you sit with this chapter, imagine a tulip blooming alone in a quiet garden. No contracts, no crowds, just color against earth. Its beauty does not depend on price. It does not care if anyone watches. That is the posture of durability. In the end, the lesson is not about flowers. It is about distance. The distance between an asset and its purpose. The distance between belief and use. The distance between warmth and fire. Those who fly too close to the sun are not destroyed by ambition. They are undone by forgetting what things are meant to do. And forgetting, once it spreads, is contagious. By the time long-term capital management was born, finance believed it had matured beyond myth. The year was 1994. The Cold War had ended. Computers had grown powerful. Markets felt calmer, more liquid, more predictable. Volatility, once feared, appeared tame. To many, the chaos of earlier decades looked like a primitive phase, now replaced by models, data, and precision. Long-term capital management did not emerge from greed. It emerged from confidence in intelligence. Its founders were not gamblers. They were scholars, traders, mathematicians. Among them were men who would later win the Nobel Prize in economic sciences. Their work formalized the pricing of risk itself. They did not merely trade markets. They believed they understood their inner mechanics. This distinction matters. LTCM was built on convergence, small mispricings between related securities, bonds that should move together but temporarily didn't, tiny inefficiencies multiplied by enormous scale. The trades looked almost riskless. If history was any guide, prices would converge. They always had. The fund's early performance was extraordinary. Returns were steady, impressive, almost boring in their consistency. This bored investors in the best possible way. Capital flooded in. Banks competed to lend. Leverage increased quietly, rationally, logically. Each additional unit of leverage seemed justified by past stability. This is how gravity disappears. Not suddenly, but politely. The models assumed markets were mostly rational. That extreme events were rare and independent. That correlations behaved consistently. These assumptions were not foolish. They were reasonable, given recent data. But reasonableness is not robustness. The fund did not fear volatility. It welcomed it, as long as it behaved historically, and for a while, it did. Positions grew. Risk controls relaxed. Not because of recklessness, but because nothing bad had happened yet. Success reinforced belief. Belief justified expansion. This is the danger of high IQ systems. They fail not from ignorance, but from overfitting reality to past patterns. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis arrived. Markets trembled. LTCM lost money, but nothing alarming. The models adjusted. Confidence remained intact. If anything, the crisis reinforced the belief that convergence trades would eventually pay off. Then came Russia. In August 1998, Russia defaulted on its debt. This was not supposed to happen. Sovereign defaults were modeled as improbable. Correlations that had remained politely separated suddenly fused. Markets did not behave irrationally. They behaved urgently. Liquidity vanished. Prices moved together not because they should, but because everyone needed to exit at once. Convergence reversed. Spreads widened violently. The very trades designed to profit from calm began hemorrhaging under stress. LTCM's positions were enormous. Too large to unwind without moving markets. Too interconnected to isolate. Leverage, once a multiplier of intelligence, became a multiplier of fragility. The models did not break. Reality did not follow them. This is the moment gravity returned. Losses accelerated. Banks that had eagerly lent now hesitated. Collateral calls arrived faster than positions could be adjusted. The system did not collapse because it was wrong. It collapsed because it was too optimized for one version of the world. The Federal Reserve intervened, coordinating a private bailout to prevent systemic contagion. The fund was dismantled. The myth of mastery evaporated almost overnight. LTCM did not fail because its founders were arrogant men. It failed because they trusted elegance more than resilience. They believed intelligence could substitute for humility. In finance, this is the purest form of hubris. Not loud, but refined. Not emotional, but academic. The lesson of LTCM is not that models are useless. It is that models are maps, not terrain. And maps become dangerous when mistaken for the land itself. As you sit with this story, notice how comforting precision feels. How seductive it is to believe that enough data can dissolve uncertainty. That risk can be fully priced. That volatility can be tamed permanently. The banker who forgot gravity did not leap from a cliff. He built a bridge of equations and assumed it could never collapse. Gravity waited patiently. After the collapse, many asked the wrong question. They asked how such intelligent men could be so wrong. The better question is how they could be so right for so long without learning the most important lesson. Long-term capital management did not misunderstand markets. It misunderstood itself. Inside the fund, there was no chaos, no panic trading, no wild bets. There were meetings, calculations, revisions. The calm persisted even as losses mounted. This calm is often mistaken for discipline. Sometimes it is simply disbelief slowed by intellect. The partners trusted their models not because they were arrogant, but because the models had been faithful. For years, they had captured reality with uncanny accuracy. Small deviations always corrected. The world behaved politely. Polite systems train dangerous habits. When volatility returned, it did not return as noise. It returned as regime change. The assumptions underlying convergence were not violated incrementally. They were invalidated wholesale. Correlations spiked. Liquidity evaporated. Prices moved not toward equilibrium, but away from it. This is the phase most traders are unprepared for. Not loss, but incoherence. Incoherence is terrifying because it cannot be reasoned with in real time. The rules that once explained everything suddenly explain nothing. LTCM was not facing bad luck. It was facing a different universe. The fund's leverage was not obscene by the standards of its peers. What made it lethal was concentration and homogeneity. Many banks had similar exposures. Many funds used similar strategies. When stress arrived, everyone rushed through the same exits. The exits were narrow. This is where scale becomes destiny. Small funds can unwind quietly. Large funds become the market. Their attempt to escape becomes the very force that crushes them. The irony is sharp. LTCM strategies relied on liquidity that existed only because participants believed liquidity would always exist. When belief vanished, liquidity vanished with it. Liquidity is not a substance. It is a shared expectation. The Federal Reserve understood this. Their intervention was not about saving LTCM. It was about preventing the collapse of belief itself. If the fund failed chaotically, it could have triggered a chain reaction across global markets. This detail matters. It shows how individual hubris can metastasize into systemic risk. When many intelligent actors share the same blind spot, the blind spot becomes a fault line. After the dust settled, reports were written. Lessons were cataloged. Risk managers nodded solemnly. But human memory is short, and markets reward forgetting. The most unsettling aspect of LTCM is not that it failed, but that its logic never disappeared. It evolved. It hid inside new instruments, new acronyms, new promises of safety, value at risk, stress testing, tail hedging. Each one useful, none sufficient. Because the core error was not technical. It was philosophical. LTCM believed risk could be fully observed from the inside. That if you modeled enough variables, uncertainty would collapse into probability. What they missed was reflexivity. Markets observe you back. Your size changes behavior. Your confidence changes flows. Your presence alters the very conditions you measure. Xerxes learned this when his army drank rivers dry. Faust learned it when his control erased meaning. The Dutch learned it when belief outpaced utility. Here, the lesson repeats in a modern dialect. The danger is not leverage alone. It is leverage without humility. Leverage without imagination for failure. Leverage without exits designed for stress, not comfort. Most financial collapses are not caused by ignorance of risk, but by familiarity with it. When you survive volatility repeatedly, you begin to believe you understand it. You stop fearing it. You stop preparing for its most extreme expressions. This is how gravity is forgotten. LTCM's founders were not villains. They were pioneers who flew close to the sun with instruments no one had tested at that altitude. The tragedy is not that they flew. It is that they believed the instruments made altitude irrelevant. Markets do not reward certainty. They reward preparedness for surprise. As you listen, ask yourself where your own confidence rests on repetition rather than resilience, where success has reduced your imagination for disorder, where intelligence has replaced respect. Because gravity does not announce its return. It simply resumes its work. When long-term capital management was finally dismantled, there was no dramatic courtroom confession, no single villain to blame. The offices emptied quietly. Screens went dark. Positions were unwound with surgical care, like removing a tumor without waking the patient. The world moved on faster than anyone inside the fund expected. That, too, is part of the lesson. Markets do not mourn intelligence. They absorb it. For the men who built LTCM, the aftermath was not poverty. They did not starve. They did not disappear. Many returned to academia, consulting, private life. The punishment was not material. It was existential. The realization that brilliance had not protected them from structural blindness. This is where the story turns inward. The models had not been wrong in the small sense. They had captured normality with stunning precision. What they could not capture was the moment normality stopped being relevant. That transition is not a variable. It is a rupture. Gravity is not a tail risk. It is a constant that becomes visible only when support disappears. The fund's collapse forced regulators and banks to confront an uncomfortable truth. Modern finance had become too interconnected to fail quietly. Individual risk had become collective risk. Sophistication had not reduced danger. It had redistributed it invisibly. This is the paradox of advanced systems. They feel safer precisely because danger is hidden. Before LTCM, leverage was feared openly. After LTCM, it was engineered more discreetly, wrapped in tranches, offset by hedges, disguised as diversification. The appearance of control improved. The underlying fragility remained. This is not progress. It is refinement of hubris. The deeper lesson of LTCM is not about mathematics. It is about epistemology. How we know what we know. And more importantly, what we assume we know because we have not yet been contradicted. The fund's founders trusted history because history had been kind. But history is not a contract. It is a sample. Markets punish those who confuse the two. In investing, the most dangerous sentence is not, "I don't know." It is, "I've seen this before." Because what you have seen before is only what survived to be seen. LTCM's strategies worked until they didn't, because they were optimized for survival within a narrow band of reality. When reality widened suddenly, the optimization became a trap. This is the price of efficiency without redundancy. Redundancy looks wasteful in calm times. Extra cash, smaller positions, slower growth. But redundancy is how systems breathe under stress. It is how they bend instead of break. The Greeks understood this intuitively. So did ancient merchants, farmers, and sailors. They stored grain for bad years. They built ships to survive storms, not just fair winds. Modern finance, intoxicated by precision, forgot these older instincts. LTCM is remembered as a cautionary tale, but its true warning is quieter. It asks a single question. What happens if everyone who is smart in the same way? When intelligence converges, diversity disappears. When diversity disappears, resilience follows. When resilience vanishes, collapse becomes synchronized. This is why the next crisis always surprises. Not because it is unpredictable, but because it emerges from blind spots shared by the majority. The banker who forgot gravity did not forget it personally. He forgot it collectively. As you listen to this, imagine a bridge designed by the best engineers, tested under every expected load, praised for its elegance. Then imagine a condition no one modeled, because it had never occurred before. The bridge does not fail because it was poorly built. It fails because it was built for yesterday. Markets are bridges suspended over uncertainty. The role of risk management is not to eliminate falling. It is to ensure that when falling occurs, it is survivable. LTCM did not design for survivability. It designed for optimization. And optimization, without humility, is a form of arrogance that wears a lab coat. The lesson that remains is stark and useful. Never confuse precision with protection. Never assume that understanding something makes you immune to it. And never forget that gravity applies most forcefully to those who believe they have outgrown it. The sun did not destroy long-term capital management. Altitude did. Alexander did not conquer the world because he was cruel. He conquered it because he was restless. From childhood, he lived beneath a ceiling made of prophecy. His mother whispered that he was descended from gods. His tutor, Aristotle, filled his mind with heroes who achieved immortality through action. His father, Philip of Macedon, gave him the most dangerous inheritance of all: a perfected war machine and a boyhood spent watching limits retreat. By the time Alexander crossed into Asia, he was not chasing territory. He was chasing confirmation. The early victories came with frightening ease. At the Granicus, then Issus, Persian armies dissolved before him. Darius fled. Cities opened their gates. The myth grew faster than the man. Soldiers began to believe they were invincible, not because they were strong, but because they were chosen. This is how momentum begins to distort judgment. Alexander fought at the front. He bled with his men. He slept on the ground. These details matter because they made his confidence feel earned. Hubris born from comfort is fragile. Hubris born from hardship is far more dangerous. Each victory rewired expectation. What had once been ambition hardened into assumption. The campaign no longer felt like a gamble. It felt like revelation unfolding according to script. When Alexander entered Egypt, he was crowned not merely as king, but as pharaoh. At the oracle of Siwa, priests greeted him as the son of Zeus Ammon. Whether he believed them fully is irrelevant. Enough people believed to change how he moved through the world. Belief alters behavior before it alters belief. Alexander pressed eastward, beyond the point any Greek army had gone before. Persia fell. Darius was murdered by his own men. The original mission was complete. By any rational measure, the campaign should have ended. It did not. Alexander stood at the edge of victory and felt only emptiness. There were no more rivals worthy of his legend. The world he had conquered was too small to contain the identity he had built. This is the moment where success becomes a trap. In modern finance, this is the investor who has already won but cannot stop playing. The goal shifts without announcement. What began as financial independence becomes domination. What began as discipline becomes obsession. Alexander did not know how to stop because stopping felt like regression. His identity was now fused with expansion. Motion itself had become proof of purpose. So he continued. The march into Central Asia was brutal. Terrain hardened. Supply lines stretched thin. Resistance grew less organized, but more relentless. The men grew weary. Victories became costly. The certainty of destiny began to fracture quietly at the edges. Alexander responded not with restraint, but with intensity. He demanded Persian customs be adopted. Proskinesis, ritual bowing, was imposed. His officers resisted. Tension grew. Friends became threats. Dissent felt like betrayal. This is what unchecked momentum does. It reframes caution as disloyalty. The murder of Cletus marked a turning point. Drunk, enraged by criticism, Alexander killed the man who had once saved his life in battle. The act horrified him afterward. He mourned, but the damage was irreversible. The conqueror had crossed a psychological boundary. In finance, this is the moment when losses are blamed not on structure, but on people. When questioning risk becomes unacceptable. When loyalty to strategy overrides loyalty to truth. Alexander pushed on toward India, chasing the edge of the known world. Battles were still won, but morale decayed. Rain fell endlessly. Horses died. Men mutinied. At the Hiphasis River, the army refused to advance further. For the first time, Alexander encountered a limit he could not kill. He raged. He pleaded. He isolated himself. Then, reluctantly, he turned back. This was not wisdom. It was exhaustion. The return march through the Gedrosian desert was catastrophic. More men died from thirst and heat than from enemy blades. Supplies vanished. Planning failed. Momentum had carried the army beyond the reach of prudence. This is the financial equivalent of holding through drawdown, because selling would mean admitting the peak has passed. Alexander returned to Babylon triumphant, but diminished. He drank heavily. He planned more campaigns. The hunger did not fade. His body did. He died at 32, having conquered more land than any man before him, and leaving behind an empire that fractured almost immediately. The lesson is not that ambition kills. It is that ambition without an exit consumes its owner. Alexander's tragedy was not mortality. It was momentum without a stopping rule. As you listen to this, ask yourself a hard question. If you achieved everything you initially set out to do, would you know how to stop? Or would you quietly move the finish line and call it destiny? Because the most dangerous phase of success is not ascent. It is continuation without purpose. When Alexander turned back from India, history often treats it as a strategic decision. In truth, it was a psychological fracture disguised as command. For years, movement had protected him from reflection. Each new horizon postponed the question he did not know how to answer. Who am I if there is nothing left to conquer? When the army refused to march, the question arrived fully formed, and Alexander had no language for it. Momentum had become his identity. Back in Babylon, he tried to recreate motion through administration, through plans for fleets and canals, through new campaigns imagined faster than they could be executed. The body remains active when the soul has already outrun its purpose. This is where the myth becomes intimate. Alexander's empire was too large, too young, too dependent on his personal gravity to stabilize. He had not built institutions. He had built velocity. Cities bore his name, but governance was improvised. Unity existed because he existed. In finance, this is the founder-led strategy that scales faster than its controls. The portfolio that grows on intuition rather than structure. As long as the founder is present, everything works. Remove him, and coherence dissolves. Alexander believed he would always be present. He began to demand divinity not as ceremony, but as insulation. If he was a god, dissent became sacrilege. Limits became heresy. This was not vanity. It was defense. A mind protecting itself from the anxiety of ending. The men around him noticed the change. His generals grew cautious. His friends walked carefully. The distance between leader and led widened. Information slowed. Truth softened. This is the invisible cost of unchecked success. You do not lose intelligence. You lose honesty around you. In markets, this appears when advisors stop challenging, when dissent is framed as negativity, when caution is interpreted as lack of vision. The system becomes optimized for reassurance, not accuracy. Alexander's drinking worsened. So did his isolation. He planned an Arabian campaign even as his body weakened. The need to move had become compulsive. Stopping now felt like death. This is the addiction phase of momentum. Addiction is not about pleasure. It is about avoidance. Avoidance of stillness. Avoidance of uncertainty. Avoidance of the possibility that enough is a real answer. Alexander had conquered Persia. He had avenged Greece. He had surpassed every hero he admired. And yet, nothing inside him recognized completion. This is the silent danger of compounding success. The goalposts move quietly. What once felt extraordinary becomes baseline. Satisfaction requires escalation. In investing, this is the moment when returns that once felt miraculous feel merely acceptable. Risk is increased not to achieve goals, but to restore emotion. Leverage becomes emotional regulation. Alexander died suddenly, likely from fever, possibly worsened by exhaustion and alcohol. The exact cause matters less than the context. His body failed under the strain of a life without breaks. When he died, there was no succession plan, no clear heir. His empire fractured among generals who immediately turned against one another. What had seemed permanent dissolved into war. This is the final proof that velocity is not structure. The conqueror who could not stop built an empire that could not survive stopping. In finance, wealth built without exit strategies often vanishes when the builder disappears. The account may persist, but the edge does not. Without process, intuition dies with its owner. Alexander's lesson is not about mortality. Everyone dies. It is about the cost of ignoring completion. There is a season for growth, a season for consolidation, a season for rest. Alexander lived as if there were only one season, endlessly repeating. Markets punish that belief eventually. As you listen, ask yourself where you have mistaken motion for meaning, where scaling has replaced clarity, where stopping feels like failure rather than wisdom, because knowing when to stop is not weakness. It is the highest form of control. After Alexander's death, the silence was immediate and terrifying. The empire did not pause to mourn. It began to tear itself apart. Generals who had sworn loyalty only months before now measured distances between armies. Maps that once expanded outward began folding inward, sliced by ambition. The momentum that had carried them across the world had no reverse gear. This is the fate of systems built on motion rather than design. Alexander left no instructions, only a legend. When asked on his deathbed who should inherit the empire, he is said to have replied, "To the strongest." Whether apocryphal or not, the sentence reveals everything. Strength had replaced structure. Power had replaced continuity. In finance, this is the portfolio that grows on instinct alone. It performs brilliantly under one mind, one temperament, one moment in history. Remove that mind or change that moment, and the strategy disintegrates. There is nothing to inherit but exposure. The Diadochi Wars that followed were brutal and inevitable. Each general believed he carried Alexander's flame. None carried his restraint, because restraint had never been modeled. The empire fragmented into kingdoms that spent generations fighting over a dream already dead. Momentum creates followers. It does not create successors. This is the final warning hidden inside Alexander's story. When success is defined as perpetual expansion, stopping feels like betrayal. And so, no one knows how to stabilize when expansion ends. Markets experience this after long bull runs. Participants forget how to operate sideways. They forget how to harvest rather than chase. When growth slows, confusion sets in. Strategies designed only for ascent fail in flat or declining conditions. Alexander never learned how to consolidate. He conquered cities, but he did not cultivate institutions. He mastered battle, but not rest. His genius lay in motion, not permanence. The Greeks had a word for this imbalance, though they rarely applied it to him while he lived. Akrasia, the state of acting against one's own better judgment. knowing restraint is needed, yet being unable to apply it. Alexander's better judgment flickered many times after Persia fell, after India resisted, after his men begged him to turn back. Each time, momentum drowned it out. In investing, acrasia is holding when you know you should reduce, increasing size when risk no longer compensates, ignoring exit rules because the last time you ignored them, you were rewarded. Markets, like empires, remember patterns longer than individuals do. Alexander's death did not erase his achievements. It recontextualized them. What had looked like destiny revealed itself as acceleration without governance. The faster he moved, the less room there was to correct course. This is why the most durable financial systems prioritize survival over dominance. They accept lower peaks to avoid catastrophic reversals. They embed brakes where emotion would otherwise push harder. To stop voluntarily is to reclaim agency. The conqueror who could not stop teaches us that the danger is not ambition, but the inability to declare victory internally. Without that declaration, every success demands another, larger one. Satisfaction becomes impossible as the fire burns lower. Hold this image gently. A young king standing at the edge of the world, staring into the unknown, unable to turn back because turning back would mean asking who he is without conquest. Many investors face this same question quietly. Who am I if I am not winning? Who am I if the account stops growing? Who am I if I choose safety over spectacle? Those who cannot answer will keep flying forward until exhaustion answers for them. Those who can answer learn something Alexander never did. That stopping is not the end of power. It is the beginning of wisdom. The apprentice did not want to destroy the house. He wanted to save effort. That is how the story is usually misunderstood, as a tale about recklessness. In truth, it is a story about delegation without understanding, about power borrowed faster than wisdom can catch up. In Goethe's telling, the apprentice is left alone while the master departs. The room is quiet. Tools rest where they always have. The spells are known, at least in fragments. The young man has watched the gestures 100 times. He has memorized the words. What he lacks is not access. It is comprehension. This distinction is everything. The apprentice is tired of carrying water by hand. It is tedious, slow, beneath his intelligence. He knows there is a spell for this. He has seen it work. The broom moves. The buckets fill. The labor disappears. So he speaks the words. At first, it is magic in the purest sense. The broom rises, animated by invisible command. Water flows effortlessly. The apprentice watches with satisfaction as the room fills faster than ever before. What once required sweat now requires observation. This is the moment automation seduces. Power without friction feels like progress. But the apprentice does not know the counterspell. He has skipped the part of learning that feels unnecessary when things are going well. The broom does not stop. The water keeps rising. Satisfaction turns into unease. then into panic. He tries to command it louder. He shouts. He pleads. Nothing changes. This is the core danger of delegated power. Once activated, it does not respond to emotion. It responds only to structure. The apprentice, desperate, splits the broom in two. This only multiplies the problem. 2 brooms, 2 buckets. The flood accelerates. The house begins to drown under the weight of obedient tools. This is not punishment. It is logic unfolding. In finance, this story repeats endlessly, just dressed in modern language. Algorithms execute trades faster than human reflexes. Risk models rebalance portfolios automatically. Leverage compounds quietly while attention drifts elsewhere. At first, the systems work beautifully. They free time. They remove emotion. They optimize outcomes. The apprentice feels smart, efficient, modern. But control without understanding is an illusion. The sorcerer returns only when disaster is imminent. With a single word, he stops the chaos. He speaks not louder, but correctly. Knowledge, not authority, restores order. The master is not angry. He is disappointed. The lesson is not, do not use power. It is, do not use power you cannot stop. In markets, automation magnifies whatever it is fed. Discipline becomes consistency. Error becomes catastrophe. Speed does not create intelligence. It amplifies design. The most dangerous systems are those that work perfectly until they don't, because they train users to disengage, to trust outcomes rather than processes. The apprentice's mistake was not curiosity. It was impatience. He wanted the benefit of mastery without the burden of learning. He wanted output without insight. This is the same impulse behind blind trust in black box strategies. Systems that promise return without requiring understanding. Yield without effort. Complexity as authority. They work until conditions change. And conditions always change. As the room fills with water in the story, the apprentice experiences something crucial too late. Helplessness. Once you give control away to a process you do not understand, reclaiming it under stress becomes nearly impossible. In finance, this is when volatility spikes faster than humans can respond. When algorithms trade against one another. When liquidity evaporates in milliseconds. When human judgment arrives after damage is already done. The Sorcerer's Apprentice is not a fairy tale. It is a systems warning. It tells us that power should scale only as fast as understanding. That delegation without oversight creates runaway feedback loops. That convenience is not neutral. It shapes behavior. As you sit with this, ask yourself where you have handed control to mechanisms you no longer fully grasp. Where speed has replaced reflection. Where success has convinced you that mastery has already been achieved. Because the broom never meant harm. It simply did exactly what it was told. Once the water begins to rise, panic does not restore control. It accelerates failure. The apprentice learns this the hard way. His commands grow frantic, but the spell does not listen to tone. The broom has no awareness of context. no sense of sufficiency. It executes instructions with perfect obedience. The room flooding is not a malfunction. It is the system working as designed. This is the most uncomfortable truth about automation. When it fails, it often fails correctly. In financial systems, this appears when algorithms continue to sell into falling markets because the rules tell them to. When risk parity models rebalance into volatility because correlations demand it. When stop-loss cascades trigger further stop-losses. No one is in control in these moments. Everyone is obeying instructions written long before stress arrived. The apprentice's attempt to destroy the broom mirrors a common human response. When complexity overwhelms us, we attack the surface instead of the structure. We shut systems off abruptly. We intervene emotionally. We impose authority where understanding is required. This rarely works. Breaking the broom only multiplies the problem because the underlying command remains intact. In markets, this is when emergency measures increase instability. Forced liquidations, sudden rule changes, liquidity freezes. The intention is safety. The effect is amplification. The sorcerer's return is quiet. He does not shout. He does not hurry. He speaks the counterspell because he knows it. Knowledge reasserts order not through force, but through precision. This is the difference between power and mastery. Mastery includes the ability to stop, to reverse, to disengage. The apprentice had learned how to start the process, but not how to end it. Starting is seductive. Ending is responsibility. In investing, this is why entry rules are celebrated and exit rules are ignored. Everyone wants to know how to get in. Few want to plan how to get out. And yet, exits determine survival. Automation without explicit exit logic is hubris encoded in code. The apprentice's failure is also a failure of imagination. He could not imagine the spell continuing beyond usefulness. He assumed the system would sense when enough was enough. That assumption is deeply human and deeply wrong. Systems do not feel. They do not care. They execute. The more distance you put between yourself and execution, the more you must invest in design. Delegation requires foresight. Speed demands redundancy. Complexity requires humility. Modern finance worships efficiency. But efficiency removes buffers. It removes slack. It removes the space where humans can intervene gently. LTCM removed slack. So did many high-frequency strategies. So do individuals who automate without understanding. When things work, slack looks wasteful. When things break, slack looks like salvation. The apprentice had no slack. He had one spell, one outcome. No contingency. The house flooded because the design allowed only one state. On or off. No moderation. No feedback loop that sensed saturation. In markets, this is binary thinking. In or out. Risk on or risk off. Leveraged or sidelined. Binary systems break under nuance. The sorcerer teaches without scolding. He cleans the mess. He restores balance. The apprentice survives chastened, wiser. But the house remembers the water. This is another crucial point. Systems retain memory. Damage accumulates. Trust erodes. Even after order is restored, consequences linger. Financial markets behave the same way. After crashes, behavior changes. Liquidity dries. Risk premiums rise. Participants remember pain long after prices recover. Automation accelerates both gains and scars. The lesson here is not to reject technology. It is to respect it, to treat automation as a force multiplier that magnifies both wisdom and ignorance. As you listen, reflect on where you rely on systems you could not explain under stress, where you trust outputs more than processes, where speed has replaced supervision. Because when the water rises, understanding is the only thing that drains it. When the water is finally gone, the room does not feel the same. The floor remains damp. The air is heavy. Objects have shifted slightly from where they once belonged. Nothing is destroyed, yet nothing is untouched. This is how systems emerge from near failure. Functioning, but changed. The apprentice stands in silence, not because he has nothing to say, but because something has settled into him. He has learned that power borrowed without understanding demands repayment in fear. That shortcuts do not remove work. They postpone it, often with interest. The sorcerer does not forbid magic. He insists on sequence. First, comprehension, then delegation. This order is everything. In finance, those who survive automation cycles are not those who avoid systems, but those who know how to intervene. They understand assumptions. They know what happens when correlations break. They anticipate behavior under stress, not just under averages. The most dangerous belief in modern markets is that oversight can be outsourced permanently. That once a system is built, attention is no longer required. This belief confuses consistency with safety. Consistency is a surface property. Safety is structural. The apprentice learned the spell, but not the system. He knew the trigger, not the consequences. This mirrors investors who know how to deploy capital, but not how capital behaves when conditions invert. Leverage behaves differently in calm than in panic. Liquidity behaves differently in isolation than in crowds. Automation behaves differently when everyone is automated. The sorcerer's wisdom is quiet because it is earned. He does not remove power from the apprentice. He restores context. Power must live inside understanding, or it becomes predatory even toward its owner. In financial terms, this is governance. Risk committees, kill switches, position limits, redundancy, boring, uncelebrated structures that exist precisely so catastrophe never becomes interesting. Most people resent these structures. They slow things down. They cap upside. They demand humility. But these structures are the difference between control and catastrophe. The apprentice's flood did not come from malevolence. It came from incompleteness. Incomplete knowledge pretending to be mastery. This is why the most dangerous words in investing are set it and forget it. Markets are living systems. They change behavior when observed. They react to scale. They evolve in response to success. A strategy that works today invites imitation tomorrow, which erodes its edge the day after. Automation accelerates this decay. The sorcerer understands that mastery is not static. It must be renewed continually. What worked yesterday must be re-examined today, not out of fear, but out of respect for change. The apprentice now knows something more valuable than any spell. He knows that every mechanism carries a shadow, and that ignoring the shadow does not remove it. As you sit with this final image, remember that the house flooded not because magic is dangerous, but because magic was used without stewardship. In finance, stewardship is the quiet discipline of asking what happens if this keeps working longer than expected. What happens if everyone does this? What happens if I am wrong and cannot exit? Those questions are the counterspell. The sorcerer's apprentice survives because the master returns in time. Markets do not guarantee such mercy. They only offer memory. And memory, if listened to, can keep the room dry long after the spell is spoken. While empires collapsed and fortunes vanished in flame and water, there were always men who seemed untouched by spectacle. They did not speak loudly. They did not move quickly. They did not fly close enough to feel the sun's warmth. History often overlooks them because nothing dramatic happens when discipline works. Benjamin Graham was one of those men. He came of age during a time when markets were loud with promise and reckless with optimism. The early 20th century believed deeply in progress. Technology advanced. Credit expanded. Fortunes were made quickly, publicly, and with little apology. It was an era intoxicated by assent. Graham watched it all with careful distance. Before he became known as the father of value investing, he was simply a young analyst who had learned, painfully, how thin confidence could be. In the crash of 1929, Graham lost not just money, but illusions. He saw brilliant men ruined not by ignorance, but by certainty. Portfolios that had seemed invincible dissolved in weeks. Leverage, once celebrated, became a guillotine. Many emerged from that era bitter. Graham emerged methodical. He did not swear off markets. He studied their failures. He noticed that prices often drifted far from underlying reality, not because people were foolish, but because emotions move faster than facts. Fear and greed were not exceptions. They were the engine. Graham's insight was simple and unfashionable. Treat stocks not as lottery tickets or symbols of brilliance, but as pieces of businesses. Demand evidence. Demand margin. Demand humility. He spoke often of Mr. Market, an imaginary partner who shows up every day offering to buy or sell at wildly emotional prices. Graham's genius was not mocking Mr. Market, but refusing to argue with him. He accepted volatility as mood, not truth. This posture requires something rare: patience without boredom. Graham built systems to protect himself from himself. Rules that forced restraint when excitement surged. Valuation thresholds that made him walk away from popular stories. He stayed low not because he feared heights, but because he respected gravity. In the background, a young Warren Buffett watched quietly. Buffett was not born disciplined. He was born curious. As a boy, he devoured numbers, annual reports, and probability tables with the hunger others reserved for adventure novels. But curiosity alone does not produce wisdom. It produces motion. Graham gave Buffett something more important than technique. He gave him permission to be boring. Under Graham's influence, Buffett learned that the goal was not to impress markets, but to outlast them. That compounding favors those who avoid catastrophic loss more than those who chase spectacular gain. That brilliance shines brightest when it resists unnecessary risk. The quiet men did not predict crashes. They prepared for them. This distinction matters. Graham never claimed to know when markets would fall. He assumed they would. Eventually. Repeatedly. His strategy was built around survivability. Buying assets cheaply enough that mistakes would not be fatal. Diversifying not to maximize return, but to minimize regret. While others flew higher with each cycle, Graham stayed grounded. He accepted smaller gains in exchange for durability. He was content being underestimated. This is not humility as posture. It is humility as structure. Buffett absorbed this deeply, then refined it. Over time, he shifted from buying cheap assets to buying excellent businesses at fair prices. But the foundation remained unchanged. Margin of safety, patience, respect for uncertainty. Buffett did not avoid risk. He avoided fragility. The quiet men were not immune to fear. They felt it fully, but they did not let it dictate action. They built distance between emotion and execution. They stayed low enough that when storms arrived, they bent instead of broke. Markets reward this behavior unevenly. Long periods of underperformance test conviction. Quiet strategies look foolish during bubbles. Friends ask uncomfortable questions. Headlines celebrate others. This is where most people abandon discipline. Graham did not. Buffett did not. They understood something the flyers never did. That survival is the only real edge. That time, not brilliance, does the heavy lifting. That flying low does not mean never rising. It means rising on terms you can endure. As you listen to this, imagine standing far below the sun, where air is thick, where sound carries, where warnings can still be heard. The view may be less dramatic, but the ground remains reachable. The quiet men chose that altitude deliberately. Graham's discipline did not make him popular. It made him resilient. In bull markets, his methods looked slow, even timid. While others chased momentum, he waited. While stories captured headlines, he read balance sheets. The temptation to follow crowds never disappeared. He simply refused to indulge it. This refusal came at a cost. Graham endured years where his returns lagged the exuberant. He watched clients grow restless. He listened to criticism that his caution was outdated in a modern world. Each cycle produced the same accusation. This time is different. He did not argue. He prepared. The true test of staying low is not whether you avoid danger, but whether you can remain patient while danger appears absent. This is the hardest discipline of all. Buffett learned this early. In his partnership years, he wrote letters that sound almost apologetic by today's standards. He warned investors that underperformance was possible. He explained his logic carefully, not to persuade, but to align expectations. He knew that mismatched expectations destroy discipline faster than losses. The quiet men understood psychology as deeply as finance. They knew that fear and envy erode patience. They built structures to protect against both. One of Buffett's most overlooked traits is his willingness to hold cash. Cash is ridiculed during booms. It earns nothing. It signals indecision. But cash is not an asset class. It is optionality. Optionality is staying low with intention. When markets fell, Graham and Buffett did not rush. They evaluated. They acted selectively. They understood that crisis does not create opportunity. It reveals it. This is why their greatest gains often came after periods of restraint. They had capital when others had commitments. They had clarity when others had confusion. The quiet man also accepted boredom. Boredom is intolerable to those who equate motion with meaning. But boredom is fertile ground for compounding. It keeps risk small. It keeps leverage low. It keeps ego from demanding constant validation. Graham once wrote that the investor's chief problem, and even his worst enemy, is likely to be himself. This was not rhetoric. It was diagnosis. Most losses do not come from lack of intelligence. They come from loss of restraint, from chasing what recently worked, from abandoning structure under emotional pressure. Buffett internalized this so completely that he designed his life around it. He lived simply. He avoided environments that stimulated envy. He read quietly. He thought slowly. He stayed low not only in markets, but in lifestyle. This is not asceticism. It is insulation. The quiet men did not isolate themselves from reality. They isolated themselves from noise. They understood that noise compresses decision-making time. Silence expands it. In finance, expanded time is advantage. The flyers move fast because they must. Their altitude demands constant adjustment. The quiet men move slowly because they can. Their margin of safety absorbs delay. When the sun grows hotter, those flying high have no room to maneuver. Those flying low can wait it out. This is why the quiet men survive cycles that erase louder fortunes. Not because they are smarter, but because they refuse to overestimate themselves. As you sit with this, consider how often your decisions are shaped by impatience rather than analysis, by comparison rather than conviction, by motion rather than purpose. Staying low is not about shrinking ambition. It is about extending it across time. The greatest test of staying low arrives not during crisis, but after victory. Graham and Buffett both experienced long periods where their discipline was validated by success. Wealth accumulated. Reputation grew. Opportunities multiplied. This is where many cautious men lose themselves. They begin to believe their restraint was merely a phase, not a principle. The quiet men did not change. Graham retired early, not because he lacked opportunity, but because he had achieved sufficiency. He did not need to press further. He had learned to recognize when enough was enough. That recognition is rarer than talent, Buffett continued, but with boundaries that never loosened. He refused to invest in what he could not understand. He avoided leverage even when it was cheap. He declined trends that would have made him appear more brilliant in the short term. These refusals did not come from fear. They came from identity. Buffett knew who he was when markets were calm, so he did not have to rediscover himself when they were chaotic. This is the final lesson of the quiet men. They did not merely manage risk, they managed themselves. Markets reward those who know their own limitations, those who do not pretend to mastery in domains they have not studied, those who build strategies aligned with temperament, not ego. Flying low is not a temporary tactic. It is a lifelong posture. It means choosing environments where your worst impulses are less likely to ruin you. It means designing systems that assume you will be emotional, impatient, and occasionally wrong. Graham once suggested that investing is most intelligent when it is most businesslike. This was not a call for coldness, but for clarity. Businesses survive by planning for downturns, not by celebrating peaks. The quiet men accepted that volatility is the price of participation, not a flaw to be eliminated. They expected discomfort and refused to dramatize it. In doing so, they preserved the most valuable resource in finance: time. Time is what allows compounding to work. Time is what smooths errors. Time is what separates those who endure from those who flash and vanish. Every chapter of this journey has warned against flying too high. Here, we see the alternative. Flying low is not cowardice. It is respect for gravity. As the fire settles into embers, hold this image. Two men sitting quietly while the world chases spectacle. Their wealth grows not from brilliance, but from restraint. Not from speed, but from patience. They do not reach for the sun. They let the sun rise and set without interfering. And in doing so, they outlast it. Daedalus was not remembered for flying. That, too, is a misunderstanding. He was remembered for building, for designing labyrinths that confused kings and protected secrets, for understanding structure so deeply that even monsters became manageable when placed inside the right constraints. Long before the wings, Daedalus knew something most heroes never learn. Freedom without form is chaos. When the wings were made, they were not an act of rebellion. They were an act of engineering. Wax and feathers arranged with care. Balance tested. Weight distributed. Daedalus did not promise escape. He promised a chance, conditional on obedience to limits. Do not fly too low, he warned, or the sea will weigh you down. Do not fly too high, or the sun will unmake what holds you. Between those dangers was a narrow band of survivability. Icarus heard the words. Daedalus understood them. This is the final inversion of the myth. The father was not cautious because he lacked courage. He was cautious because he understood consequences. He had seen enough systems fail to know that elegance does not excuse physics. Daedalus did not look up in awe. He looked forward in calibration. He flew not toward glory, but toward land. In finance, this distinction separates legends from survivors. Survivors design lives, portfolios, and identities that do not require constant triumph to remain intact. They accept limits not as constraints, but as protections. They build wings meant to endure heat, not to impress the sun. The world celebrates Icarus because his fall is dramatic. It forgets Daedalus because survival is quiet. But survival is where wisdom accumulates. Daedalus lived after the flight. He adapted. He continued building. His knowledge compounded because he remained alive to refine it. Icarus became a story. Daedalus became a lineage. This is the final counsel of the fire. Your goal is not to win loudly. It is to continue, to remain present through cycles, to still be standing when narratives collapse and suns shift positions, to design systems that forgive error rather than amplify it. Risk management is not fear. It is foresight. Take profit not because you doubt yourself, but because you respect momentum. Reduce leverage not because you are weak, but because you intend to see the next season. Walk away not because you lost faith, but because faith without exit is superstition. Daedalus did not scold his son for ambition. He warned him about altitude. The sun has never been the enemy. Forgetting scale is. As the embers fade and the night settles, let this lesson sink without urgency. You do not need to change everything. You only need to remember where you are relative to gravity. Fly where you can still hear the wind. Fly where the ground remains reachable. Fly low enough to last. Because wealth, like flight, is not proven by height. It is proven by how gently you land. Settle into stillness. There is no urgency now. No ascent to measure. No horizon to chase. Only breath, slow and even, like the sea at dawn before the wind remembers itself. Imagine flight not as effort, but as balance. Wings extended, not straining upward, not sinking downward, just held, supported by air that does not need to be conquered, only respected. You are not rising. You are maintaining. In this place, success does not shout. It whispers. It reminds you that survival is not an accident, but a posture, a way of moving through the world without challenging gravity to a duel. With each breath, release the urge to prove, the need to go higher, the impulse to compare altitude with others in the sky. Comparison creates turbulence. Let it fall away. You are flying at the height where instruments still work, where signals are clear, where the ground is visible enough to orient, but distant enough to inspire calm. This is the altitude of wisdom. Here, you remember that every gain carries heat. That warmth is pleasant, but fire is indifferent. You remember that reducing speed is not surrender. It is navigation. Let the idea of enough settle gently. Enough profit. Enough growth. Enough motion for today. Enough is not limitation. Enough is alignment. In this space, risk is acknowledged without fear. You do not deny it. You do not dramatize it. You simply account for it, the way a seasoned pilot accounts for weather without resentment. You remind yourself, quietly, that staying alive is the first condition for everything else. With each slow breath, embed this truth deeper. I do not need to fly higher to be secure. I need to fly long. Long enough for seasons to change. Long enough for mistakes to soften into lessons. Long enough for compounding to work without interruption. Feel the wings steady. Feel the absence of strain. This is not ambition dying. This is ambition maturing. You are not escaping the sun. You are choosing distance, and distance preserves structure. Stay with the rhythm of breath. Nothing needs to be decided now. No action is required. This is the space where the nervous system relearns patience, where urgency dissolves into steadiness. Imagine the wings again. Not new, not perfect. Used, tested, reliable. They carry the quiet memory of storms survived and heat avoided. They do not ask how high they can go. They ask how long they can endure. Let this question sink in gently. How long? Long is where wisdom lives. Long is where impulsive edges soften. Long is where the need to impress fades into the desire to remain. Long is where wealth becomes something you inhabit, not something you chase. With each breath, allow your body to accept this truth. Survival is not passive. It is an active choice made repeatedly, often invisibly. You are allowed to step back from the sun. You are allowed to reduce speed. You are allowed to exit while others insist on climbing. None of these choices require justification. They require only awareness. Notice how calm returns when pressure is released. Notice how clarity appears when comparison falls away. The sky is wide enough without racing across it. You remind yourself, slowly, that markets move in cycles because humans do. That excess always carries its own correction. That patience is not waiting for permission. It is choosing not to be pulled. Feel the altitude stabilize. Here, decisions are not rushed. They are measured. You check instruments before changing direction. You respect signals before they become alarms. You act early, not dramatically. This is how professionals survive. You embed a simple rule, repeated gently, until it becomes instinct. I protect capital before I pursue growth. I exit before heat becomes fire. I reduce exposure when certainty feels intoxicating. Let these sentences repeat softly in the background of thought, like waves meeting shore. You do not need to remember every story you heard tonight. You only need to remember the posture they point toward. Balanced, grounded, attentive. You allow yourself to trust that stepping away from extremes preserves opportunity, that avoiding catastrophe is not missing out. It is staying in the game. The mind often confuses stillness with stagnation. The body knows better. Stillness is where repair happens, where alignment returns. Feel the wings again. Stable, responsive, unrushed. You are not flying for applause. You are flying for continuity. The ground remains visible, not as threat, but as reference. You know where you are. You know where you could land if needed. That knowledge creates calm. Calm sharpens judgment. As the night deepens, allow these ideas to sink below language. They do not need to be analyzed. They need to be absorbed. Flying low does not mean never rising. It means rising with intention and descending without shame. Flying long means honoring limits before they enforce themselves. Let this understanding settle into the body, into breath, into instinct. You are safe to rest now. The wings will be there when you wake.